One of the first shots in the Backrooms is of a little girl pressing her hand into wet cement. This gesture towards posterity is one of the oldest human instincts. It's a fact, set in stone. Except, look at this shot again. The camera angle is trying to deceive you. Is she touching a textured wall, a bed of mud, a shag carpet maybe? For a brief, deliberate moment, you can't tell. The most solid, reliable, permanent image in the entire movie, and the very first thing that Kane Parsons does with it is make you doubt your own eyes. Because The Backrooms is a movie about the chasm between reality and our perception of it, and what happens when that chasm becomes a physical place you can somehow glitch into. But to begin with, let's focus in on the handprint, and what happens to it tells you everything about what will happen to Mary. Spoilers are ahead for The Backrooms. So let's talk about the handprint. It's a reminder of everything Mary has overcome to arrive at her present moment. A relic of a happier childhood before her mother's mental illness turned their house into a labyrinth of terror and neglect, before the atomization and emotional shock trauma of institutionalization. Mary keeps it through everything. She regards it more like a talisman against evil than as a good luck charm. The handprint is the last artifact from the time of her life where the ground beneath her feet could be trusted. Kane Parsons' The Backrooms is obsessed with the recursive, with loops, mazes, and inescapably destructive habits. In keeping with this theme, Mary's handprint travels its own loop. Small hands in wet cement create it. Then a sledgehammer destroys it. Mary rescues it and repurposes it, and the handprint transforms into a paperweight on a therapist's desk. Contained, given order and a new purpose. In the same way, Mary has reordered and repurposed her own trauma. The handprint is completely changed from its original shape, but still underneath the same object. And where does its loop end? Shattered against Captain Clark's big-ass head in one last desperate act of escape. That handprint is Mary, in more ways than one. It's her whole character arc compressed into a single slab of concrete. From child to adult, from powerless to actualized, and then cruelly back to powerless. Because its destruction signals that Mary no longer makes her own fate. She's caught in the gravity well of the Backrooms, held against her will by the shadowy corporation ASYNC. And the one object that said, "I was here, this was real, I was a person," has been lost to her in the liminal. The loop closes and the cycle completes. And the recursive, unreliable nature of reality, the thing the camera showed us in one of the very first shots, turns out to be the only game in town. Because this is the only objective truth about the wildly subjective Backrooms. You can't separate it from the people inside it. Because you can't separate a person from their mind. I mean, really consider both the infinitely complex pathways of our consciousness and the complexly infinite stretches of the Backrooms. The film shows us these both have the same kind of logic. The Backrooms draws from the mind, and the mind helps create the Backrooms. The two are inextricably linked. Intrusive thoughts that loop and form patterns that become destructive habits. Anxieties with no cause. Guilt with no crime. Pathways, both neural and metaphysical, worn deep by repetition, leading nowhere, maintained forever. So to represent this symbolically, the film gives us two parallel characters with different lives, who both become trapped in the Backrooms in no small part due to the unruly dictates of their own mind and the paths each sets them on. Take Clark. No, seriously, take him. He's terrible. Clark is a failed architect, a failed husband, a failed furniture salesman, and he's closing in on becoming a failed human being. He is a toxic sludge of rage and resentment who drinks himself to sleep every night in his failing furniture store. He has ended up this way because he has refused to change, because he let the intrusive thoughts win, and before he even sets foot in them, the Backrooms builds Clark a doppelganger, the dashingly hideous Captain Clark. Because Clark, as remembered by the Backrooms, is an emotionally and physically deformed monstrosity. But Clark sees only himself, until his doppelganger tears him to bits in a not-so-subtle metaphor for the rage and alcoholism that had quietly been demolishing his life to that point. The Backrooms didn't invent a monster for Clark out of whole cloth. It just built his monster a body that matched his mind and let whatever freak show metaphysics passes for nature in the Backrooms take its course. And then there's something about Mary. For Mary, the Backrooms aren't a metaphor at all. They're a memory, and an unpleasant one. A physical manifestation of her childhood home. A house turned labyrinth by a deeply mentally ill mother who stalked its filthy, cluttered rooms like a minotaur, who imprisoned her at home and then, after being committed, left Mary to the mercies of indifferent institutions. Imagine how that kind of childhood affects a person into adulthood. And then think about the career Mary chose. Mental health. She built a therapeutic system from scratch, a framework, a map, to guide her away from the madness that had consumed her mother. She spent her whole adult life trying to force structure onto the mind, trying to pour a foundation of concrete rationality on top of the shifting sands of the irrational. But despite this, Mary ends up institutionalized against her will. Her mother was caught in the mental backrooms, and Mary gets trapped in the metaphysical ones. The shape of each prison changed, but the sentencing didn't. And the ironies here surrounding these characters are lip-smackingly good. Because Clark is an architect, a man whose entire profession should be about structure and logic, about designing walls that stay where you build them. And yet, despite this, he ultimately finds peace and purpose inside these structurally schizophrenic backrooms. The man who couldn't make structure work in the real world is finally at home in a place where structure goes to die. And Mary, the woman who made structure part of her professional brand and personal identity, discovers that all the pathways in the world to peace couldn't save you when the very ground you walk on might eat your feet. One surrenders to the irrational and finds peace, and the other fights it with every fiber of her being and loses anyway. Both of these characters failed or were failed by the structures they built their lives on. But what if I told you there was a whole ass cultural movement that these two represent that's also in play in the film? So, the Backrooms references the Modernist movement explicitly. Clark's t-shirt at the beginning of the film is an exaggerated wink and nod. The film tells us to pull on this thread, so let's start pulling. Modernism was a seismic cultural shift that upended Western art and literature from roughly the 1870s to the dawn of the nuclear age. A deliberate revolt against older traditional forms of expression because those older forms could no longer truly represent a world driven insane by the upheavals of industrialization, the ravages of various pandemics like the Spanish flu, and the wholesale slaughter of the First World War that saw tens of millions of people die in brutal and dehumanizing ways. And while the world was tearing itself to pieces and coughing itself to death, Freud broke new psychosexual ground with his exploration of the unconscious mind, inventing concepts like the ego, superego, and id. Nietzsche proclaimed that God as we knew him was dead, and Einstein's theory of relativity told us that time itself is unreliable, depending on both gravity and how hard the Hans Zimmer score is going. So filter through this mass dying and ideological apocalypse, the certainties of the past got jammed up like old clocks, choked with rust, and reality came to be perceived as fragmented and subjective. And our art, the way we express ourselves and the truth of our world to our world, changed to reflect this. The modernists tried to convey this through artistic forms that were meant to be difficult to engage with, to force the form of their art to match the rudderless uncertainty of their world. They wrote fragmented poems about loneliness, isolation, and despair, like Eliot's love song of Jail for Prufrock and Yeats's The Second Coming. They penned atrociously complex streams of consciousness novels, like James Joyce's A Portrait of the Artist as a young man. I still haven't read that goddamn book all the way through. The Backrooms manifests this modernist moroseness as a location, as physically traversable geography, an overgrown jungle of symbolic noise. The essence of modern life boiled down to its most sterile. And not a few modern horror films have picked up on modernist themes of isolation, confusion, and that sense of being caught off balance by a world that has suddenly and seismically shifted beneath your feet. And honestly, those themes are at play in my life too, even in current year, far removed from the trenches and barbed wire of yesteryear. Because for more than a decade now, the land I live in looks the same. The people mostly look the same, but everything is slightly wrong. Reality is ever just so slightly bent around an invisible and uncanny force that makes you go, what the fuck? And all the while the world is spinning wildly beneath our feet, reconfiguring itself around us in real time, often too fast and too subtle to notice. Joyce, Eliot, Pound, and Yeats, and the rest of the modernists would be right at home here. They'd probably recognize the carpet. The backrooms are what happens when symbols get Cancer. I know what you're thinking. Put down the bong. To which I say, it's not a bong, it's a vaporizer, and you're not my dad. Here's what I mean. A symbol is healthy when it points at something. A stop sign means stop. There's a sign and there's a thing that the sign is for. Meaning is a relationship. Signifier, signified. Map, territory. Cancer is when the body's own machinery, its cell division and growth, runs amok and breaking its DNA prescribed role and growing beyond the boundaries of the body even when it means death. Now look at the Backrooms, because Kane Parsons, the youngest person ever, is presenting a world where symbols have developed cancer. Hallways that lead nowhere, tumescent piles of furniture, doors that open into more doors. The dead seagull, a bird that should signify land ho, a destination, an end to your journey, adrift, signifying nothing. Objects half melted into the floor, caught forever between states. The recurring stop sign, the subconscious screaming, a warning in place where there's nothing to stop for. And also language itself degraded into noise. When you can't understand a foreign tongue, you're locked out of meaning. And the cardboard caveman cutout jabbering in every language on earth is just the sonic counterpart to the visual noise of the Backrooms. And again, this is in no small part a reflection of our current times, where meaning has seemingly fucked off like a seagull in the Backrooms, and we're left with the husks of symbols and empty rhetoric shouted at us like foreign languages we'll never have a chance at understanding. So let's come back one last time to the handprint, a thing that should be true, a single inarguable point of contact between our perception and our reality. But there is no such point in the Backrooms. The cement shatters and the handprint becomes a deformed paperweight, and then the paperweight eventually becomes a symbol. The symbol shatters in the Backrooms, and the hand that made the print ends up pressed against yellow wallpaper in a hallway that has metastasized into a place built from the chasm between what's real and what we can perceive, a gap we all carry with us every day in the electrified anxiety meat behind our eyeballs. If this video added to your Backrooms experience, let me know down in the comments. Sub the channel if you want more of this kind of content, and yeah, thanks for watching.